Although the human mind can be considered a brilliant invention of evolution, it is also capable of horrendous imaginations. Throughout the centuries, the pages of history have sung about gruesome tales of torture, human ruthlessness, and the sadistic pleasure both individuals and groups of people derived from seeing others in excruciating agony. Learn, if you dare, 10 brutal ways people were executed in the ancient world. Crucifixion, from the ancient world to the modern. The crucifixion ephra angelico. Starting off this macabre list is crucifixion. This was practiced both in the ancient world and as recently as the 20th century. It was first introduced by the Assyrians and Babylonians, followed by the Persians, Alexander the Great, and the Phoenicians, who initiated it in Rome in the 3rd century BC. Crucifixion involved being tied or nailed to a wooden beam, or cross. Nails were pierced through the bones below the wrists to bear the weight of the person. It was a brilliant placement because no major blood vessels were hit, only the median nerve, which would cause the fingers to seize and the hands to flex down in an excruciating contraction. The feet were nailed to the vertical part of the cross, and once the legs weakened, the arms had to hold up the body, resulting in the shoulders being pulled from their sockets. The elbows and wrists would soon follow, with the arms now several inches longer. At this point, the chest had to bear the body's weight, triggering respiratory problems and eventual suffocation. Real-life example, Jesus Christ. Jesus' crucifixion took place in Judea in the 1st century AD. He was arrested, tried, sentenced, flagellated, and then crucified by the Romans. Rat torture. Eaten a live rat. Torture is right up there when it comes to one of the worst ways to go. The thing about rats is that they eat through anything. Thus, it comes as no great surprise that humans made a torture device out of them in the ancient world. Typically, a rat was placed inside a small cage positioned against the victim's abdomen. The cage was heated from the outside, either by a candle, flaming stick, or hot coals, causing the rat to become agitated. So, how could it escape? By clawing its way into the only available soft surface, human skin. Quite quickly, the rat would gnaw its way into the victim's bowels, eliciting unbearable agony in the process. This technique effectively got information out of prisoners and played on their psyches, adding a psychological element to the torture. Real-life examples. Europe. During the Dutch Revolt in the 17th century, Dutch leader Diederik Sonnij used rat torture on prisoners. The rack, stretching the body. Another brutally famous torture device in the ancient world was the rack. It involved a table, usually wooden, with axles and levers at both ends. The victim was forced to lay down, after which leather straps, belts, bound their wrists and heels. The straps had chains or ropes tied to them, which wound over the axles. One or several torturers would then slowly push the levers, causing the axles to rotate and produce tension in the chains. This caused the straps to dig into the prisoner's skin and gradually stretch their body outwards. The internal physical turmoil that one would have suffered is hard to swallow. Vertebrae expanded, joints, muscles, and tendons gave way. Posture changed. The rib cage pressurized the lungs, bones shattered, nerve endings became exposed. The pain would be near unimaginable. As a bonus for the especially tough, they were placed on spiked axles that stripped their back of its flesh. Real-life examples. Britain. In 1447, British Constable John Exeter used the rack to torture prisoners in the Tower of London. Keelhauling, dragged under coming in at 7th of brutal ways to die in the ancient world, is the horrifying ordeal of keelhauling. The term comes from the Dutch word keelhalen, meaning to drag along the keel, which is precisely what this torture method did. The sailor was stripped, tied, and suspended by a rope from the ship's mast, with weights or chains attached to their legs. The rope was looped beneath the ship, and once the sailor was released, they were dragged under the keel. The fatality rate was practically 100%. If the person did not drown, they suffered severe head trauma from repeatedly smacking against the keel, as well as deep lacerations from the barnacles and other aquatic growth present on the hull. If they survived and were hauled back on board, death would most likely still result from wound infections. Real-life examples. English. The English Royal Navy used this method in the 11th century. Several 17th century English writers also recorded it on British naval ships. The wheel. A severe bashing. Next up is a means of torture beyond excruciating. The wheel, also known as the execution wheel, breaking wheel, or Catherine wheel. This commonly used ruthless contraption in the ancient world was reserved for public executions. There are variations on the practice, but generally the prisoner was tied to a large wooden spoked wheel. The goal was not to kill them, but severely mutilate them, with the executioner starting with breaking the leg bones and then working their way up. They would do this via an iron bar, beating the victim to near death, crushing all their bones and bludgeoning them. Once finished, the now ghastly maimed prisoner would be repositioned on the wheel so that their heels came together at the back of their neck. They were left that way to bleed to death.